Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. This is Doctors Accidentally Killed One of the Best American Presidents. Now, I kind of disagree. This is going to be about James Garfield. We don't know. He's the what if president. So I disagree because he was assassinated. We only got about 6 months out of him. Potential. It's a big title to throw out when we don't know. But anyways, this is Mr. Beat. You can click that thumbs up. Bare minimum, please. Subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Click on the thanks button. Donate to the channel if you want to keep it rolling. Now, this is Mr. Beat, and I believe one of the other channels that I like, yes, and Vlogging Through History. So this ought to be, if you like history, then you're going to get a really good lesson from both of these gentlemen. Gentlemans is what they say in some countries. Just made that up. All right, let's get into it. This is going to be 2 videos, 2 parts, 15 minutes.
I know you think history is boring, but I found someone I bet can change your mind. James Garfield.
Greetings.
Sure, I may be Mr. Beat, but this is James Garfield. Well, actually, it's just a bobblehead of James Garfield. I got it at his house. For real, dude. I'm not playing. And Kris from Vlogging Through History even joined me. It was so Ohio. In fact, it was about as Ohio as you could get. Ohio has produced more American presidents than any other state except Virginia. And of those, James Garfield might just be my favorite. Somebody who is not really remembered much at all, but I think he was actually pretty great guy.
Yeah, intelligent guy, young, late 40s, very charismatic.
He could have been the greatest president in American history. We just don't know.
And we here in Ohio will stand by that. We love our Garfield here.
Now, he's not my favorite Ohio president because of what he actually accomplished. He's my favorite Ohio president because of what he could have accomplished. This is literally what society would look like if not for the fact that, he was assassinated.
So, little tangent, side note story. I've never been to James Garfield's house. I want to go. It's in Ohio. It's on the list. So, in the I believe it was 1880 election, John Sherman, who was he had served in the Civil War. He was he the older brother or younger brother of William Tecumseh Sherman? Obviously, this is 1880. You're talking after the Civil War. William Tecumseh Sherman is a name. John Sherman was a congressman in Ohio and was loved in Ohio. Didn't have much of a national name. So he wanted to be president. So he tabbed his friend, James Garfield, who was also in Ohio and had been in Congress and then walked away from Congress because it just wasn't lucrative. He went back into being a lawyer. And he had a family to pay for, so you can't blame the guy. Not like now where you go in broke in 3 years are worth millions. It's ridiculous. And so Sherman sends him to the Chicago Convention to give a speech on his behalf and nominate him. Garfield does. People are like, damn, that was a great speech. So they're hyped. They go 40 votes. Sherman gets close, but never gets that, I think it's 50% margin, whatever the vote total was. And he was maybe within 30 to 50 votes, somewhere in that range, but never hit that threshold. You got to imagine these votes. They take a long time. Just one round. So finally, all the heads, all the Republican heads get together and they're like, okay, something has to change. And somebody says, what about Garfield? He gave a hell of a speech, fired up everyone. We all know him. He was a general in the Civil War. He he is a lawyer. He was in Congress. We all got to know him. He's a very honest guy, straight up, straightforward, gets along with everybody, doesn't really have enemies. Like, he's trustworthy. He's a good dude. Why not? Why couldn't someone like him be president? Think about the black horse that we've had over time, James K. Polk, stuff like that. And people are like, why not? Let's just throw it out there and see what happens. It's, maybe more people will get behind somebody else that we already have. Maybe they'll get behind Garfield. Who knows? Vote 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, and 46. Garfield is nominated. He went from a little bit to the peak in just 6 rounds. And Garfield got all the votes. When John Sherman found out, he wasn't mad at all. He was very happy that his friend ended up getting it when he realized he wasn't going to. He later on was very upset knowing, spoiler, if you don't know, James Garfield would be dead today, but he was assassinated. I don't remember the guy's name, but he was assassinated. And we only got maybe 6-7 months. 6 to 9 months, somewhere in that range. I don't remember exactly. So John Sherman was crushed. He wanted to run again. They were like, you just don't have the name. So on a side note, John Sherman went on to sponsor and write the bill for the Sherman Antitrust Act in the late 1880s, early 1890s. And people were like, you could probably run for president. And he was like, I'm too old. And he ended up serving in Benjamin Harrison's presidency. So he passed, Garfield gets to 20, which is what he wanted. He ends up serving in the 23rd president's cabinet, Benjamin Harrison. And I think then he was in his 70s. He was starting to potentially show signs of just being a little senile. And so they kind of had issues with him. They had to pull back with him. But just a little interesting side note for you.
I'm not talking about John F. Kennedy or Abraham Lincoln here. I'm talking about James Garfield. Other presidents were assassinated, James Garfield was assassinated. And he died just 199 days after taking office. And about 79 of those days, or nearly 40% of the time he was president, he was slowly dying in excruciating pain. The only president who served a shorter term than Garfield? William Henry Harrison, who died just 31 days into his presidency. But unlike Harrison, no disrespect to Harrison, but unlike Harrison, Garfield was awesome, man. He was a legit better person than most other presidents. He was one of the most intelligent, most progressive, and least corrupt presidents in American history. Whenever American history dorks like myself bring up Garfield, they frame him as the biggest what if president.
What if there's so much that could have been accomplished, and who knows what we missed out on because he died so early in his term.
What if James Garfield got to serve a full term, or even 2 full terms, or more? Hey, remember, this was before the 22nd Amendment. How much better off would the United States have been? Well, in my humble opinion, I think the United States would have been much better off had Garfield lived. And by the end of this video, I hope you understand why I feel that way. James Abram Garfield was born on November 19th, 1831, in a log cabin in Orange Township, Ohio. Yes, another log cabin president. But, bruh, that's not literally the cabin. Just chillax. It's a replica. It's now part of Moreland Hills, not that far from Cleveland. Heck, the Moreland Hills Police Department is right next to where he was born, and so are some people's backyards. Oh yeah, that's Kris from Vlogging Through History. We met up for a day to check out Garfield sites in northeastern Ohio, which...
I hope when they met up, they held hands. Because that's what you should do when you meet up with somebody at a presidential home. You should hold hands with them.
is where Kris is from. Even did some hiking to the exact spot where his birthplace was. Anyway, James was the youngest of 5 kids. James had no memory of his father, Abram. When he was a toddler, Abram saved the family farm from a wildfire, but in doing so, probably breathed in too much smoke and caught a fever. He'd die a couple days later on May 8th, 1833.
I don't know a whole lot about James Garfield, just a heads up. I know that story at the beginning. I know a little bit here and there, not a whole lot about the guy.
Left James's mom, Eliza, in charge of the family homestead, a homestead that already had a lot of debt. To pay off this debt and to feed her 5 young children, Eliza sold off most of the land. Garfield grew up dirt poor. He had one of the poorest upbringings of all American presidents, if not the poorest. Young James didn't own his first pair of shoes until he was 4 years old. Eliza believed the ticket to prosperity was education. She even donated some of her land so a schoolhouse could be built on it, as long as her children could attend. She especially saw potential in her youngest son, James, who had a pretty easy time learning stuff compared to other kids. When he wasn't studying or reading, he'd be working in the fields, especially in the spring. James was incredibly clumsy, always injuring himself. And as he recovered, he'd read a lot. He often read about life at sea. Although James lived hundreds of miles from an ocean and he was a horrible swimmer, he dreamed of becoming a sailor. In fact, when he was 16 years old, he devastated his mom when he abruptly left home to try to become a sailor. The furthest he got was the Ohio and Erie Canal, a canal his dad helped build. As a matter of fact, he guided animals pulling canal boats. It was tough work. He sometimes worked as much as 15 hours a day. After falling into the canal one night and nearly drowning, Garfield was like, okay, I'm done working the boats, and headed home, where he then spent the next 2 months nearly dying again, sick in bed after getting malaria from the water he fell in. But he did recover, now determined to go to college while also becoming more religious, attending camp meetings or Christian revival outdoor gatherings that often featured a bunch of music and charismatic preachers. James also began attending Geauga Seminary, but still working part-time as a field hand, then later as a carpenter and teacher. Yep, he was such a good student that he taught other students. At Geauga, James joined debate club and became fascinated with how a speaker could captivate an audience. Eventually, he'd become quite a good speaker himself. Also at Geauga, he met Lucretia Rudolph, who he was very attracted to. Around this time, James became a committed member of the Disciples of Christ. He even became a preacher. In 1851, at the age of 19, Garfield got accepted into a small college in Hiram, Ohio, called the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, today simply called Hiram College. Since he couldn't afford tuition, he worked as a janitor in exchange for his education. By his second year there, the college was so impressed with him as a student that they made him an assistant professor. Not only was he the smartest student there, he was arguably the most popular student there. Lucretia also attended the institute, and she would also become a teacher. By that time, the two had fallen in love, and Garfield proposed to her. However, the wedding would have to be postponed as Garfield transferred to Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. The two would write love letters back and forth, but while at Williams College, Garfield also got in a relationship with a woman named Rebecca Selleck. Oh no, a love triangle. Well, James ultimately returned to Lucretia, but the two wouldn't get married until November 11th, 1858. They had a somewhat rocky marriage in those early years, especially since Garfield was rarely home, but ultimately the two's love would grow as they got older. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Before that, after graduating from Williams College, second in his class, Garfield had traveled around a bit before ultimately returning to the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, this time as a professor. He taught everything from English to Latin to Greek to history to geology to mathematics. He did so well, the institute soon made him the principal. In his spare time, he studied to become a lawyer. You know, for funsies. He'd passed the bar exam in 1861. But 2 years before this, when he was still principal at the Eclectic Institute, politics came a-calling. Garfield was very interested in politics, but wasn't necessarily interested in becoming a politician. And yet, his combination of intelligence, charisma, and faith made him a natural leader, so much that others thought he'd be an excellent politician. When an Ohio state senator suddenly died in the summer of 1859, Garfield agreed to run for a spot as long as he didn't have to beg people to support him. Well, he easily won the election. However, just over a year after Garfield had entered politics, the bloodiest conflict in American history had begun: the American Civil War. Garfield was clearly on the Union side, a supporter of President Lincoln, and not only a strong abolitionist, but someone who thought that African Americans should be treated equally to everyone else. Garfield didn't hesitate, leaving the legislature for the battlefield, volunteering for the Union Army, and quickly rising through the ranks. Now 30 years old, he became the colonel of the 42nd Regiment, enthusiastically recruiting dudes from Hiram, many of them students of the Eclectic Institute. The 42nd's first mission was to fight back the growing rebel forces in Kentucky. In January 1862, Garfield commanded troops in Floyd County, where he encountered Confederate forces led by the much more experienced Humphrey Marshall. Marshall had more than 2,000 soldiers. Garfield had less than 1,500 soldiers and no artillery. Still, despite Garfield's inexperience, he was able to lead his forces to victory in what became known as the Battle of Middle Creek. This victory got Garfield nationwide recognition and a promotion to Brigadier General. However, the following summer, he had to take a break from the war after getting sick pretty badly. Around that time, a bunch of Ohioans convinced Garfield to run for the U.S. House of Representatives. Even though Garfield didn't campaign at all, he got more than 66% of the vote. Garfield didn't want to leave the army and only finally decided to serve in Congress after President Lincoln convinced him he was needed more in Congress than on the battlefield. And thus marked the beginning of a 17-year career in the U.S. House of Representatives. From the very beginning, Garfield didn't hide the fact that he thought that slavery was not only really bad, but that blacks deserved 100% the same rights as whites. For that, he got called a radical Republican, you know, since it was so radical to be for civil rights and stuff. Freaking humans. Aww. So disappointing at times. Even as a brigadier general, he refused to obey an order to capture a runaway slave. One of the first things he did in Congress was introduce a resolution to allow blacks to walk freely on the streets of D.C. He was one of the first members of Congress to call for African Americans to have the right to vote and argued they needed extra protections against racist laws toward them. Throughout his career, he'd worked to get several African Americans appointed to prominent positions. Meanwhile, he and Lucretia had started a family. They'd have 7 children together. Eliza died when she was 3, and Edward died when he was just 1. The other 5, Harry, James Rudolph, Mary, Irvin, and Abram, all lived to adulthood. The loss of his daughter, Eliza, particularly devastated Garfield. It had happened right before he entered Congress. Around that time, Garfield had also had an affair with a journalist named Lucia Runkle. I said Lucia Runkle, not Lucia your uncle. Garfield ended the affair when Lucretia found out about it, and he may have had even more affairs. It's worth noting that I had no idea about all these affairs until I started researching for this video. By the end of the Civil War, Garfield had become known as a leader in Congress. He was the first to speak out about rich people being able to buy their way out of serving in the military. He even found time to write up an original proof of the Pythagorean theorem when he got bored, which later got published in the New England Journal of Education. Dang. And what helped him be a good leader? His riz, baby. Always a fan of hearing himself talk, Garfield gave more speeches in Congress than most of his colleagues, but it's all good. He was pretty good at talking. But still poor, still not making much money. Due to this, he began taking on cases as a lawyer. In 1866, he defended Indiana men who had been sentenced to death for aiding the Confederacy. His Republican colleagues were horrified, but Garfield took on the case in principle and won, I should add. Garfield also was against the impeachment of President Andrew Johnson. Okay, well, at least at first. And sure, Garfield supported the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but in the late 1860s, he began to moderate his views from the more radical wing of the Republican Party. For example, he thought that the Enforcement Act, aka the Ku Klux Klan Act, gave the president too much power. This moderation of views even hurt his friendships in Congress. For example, he famously drifted apart from his once good friend, Salmon Chase, during this time. Garfield served.
I'm going to go ahead and kick it back about there. We'll kind of re-go over all that. Oh, this thing would stop glitching. Just stop glitching. Anyway, so we'll go from there. This is part 1. Like I say, I got a book on him, but unfortunately the book just covers his... let me check. What does it cover? It's James A. Garfield, Garfield of Ohio, the Available Man. It must cover his whole life. I didn't think it did. No, it doesn't. It starts with, I was telling you about the convention, and the first chapter is a convention in Chicago. The 1880 party convention. Yep. So this pretty much starts with his rise. It's not a very big book. Oh, there you go. It's 289 pages with the epilogue. It's not. Book fell. So anyways, we'll end it here. We'll be back with part 2. I got to get some food because I'm hungry. So until then, have a good day. Have a good night.